afternoon, live on the GBCAM network from Toronto. This is the Chat Up Show, the show where we catch you up of the weekly headlines with a chat up. I'm your host, Elizabeth Lloydie, and I hope that you are ready to chat it up with me today. Now, as always, you know you can keep up with the GBCAM network in various ways. You can listen and watch live 24/7 at www.gbkam.tv or www.gbkam.fm, where you can also check out any past shows you may have missed, check out our upcoming show schedule, learn a little bit more about our on-air personalities, check out our breaking news tabs, and so much more. You can also download our free app, which is available for all iOS and Android devices. Right now, it's the GBCAM app. So if you can go to the App Store, the Google Play Store, you can download it for free today. You get the same features as our web station and network. You can watch live, listen live 24/7, like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Check out our past shows, check out our upcoming shows. All of that available on our app. So you can download that right now for free on all iOS and Android devices. Of course, you can continue to enjoy the shows on Facebook and YouTube at GBCAM Network, where, as you know, you can continue to join the conversation by liking, sharing, and commenting. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at GBCAM Network, so you can stay updated with us right here at the, you guessed it, GBCAM Network. Now, exciting news for those of us in Ontario. We have officially made it to stage 3 of our reopening plan. And so many people are so excited about this. We're at the final step. So now we have over 70 to 80% of adults who have 1 dose and more than about 50% who are fully vaccinated right now. So what does this mean for us now that we are in stage 3? It means that indoor dining, indoor cinemas, nightclubs, gyms, all the things that we have been missing for the last 9 months are finally available to us again. Social gatherings of up to 25 people indoors are permitted and up to 100 people outdoors. Of course, we will remain in stage 3 for about 3 weeks, which is part of the entire plan. We know that we have to stay in these stages for 21 days before we move on to the next step. So we also know that essential and non-essential retail is open with, of course, limited capacity, but it's a little more permitted within the capacity than before. Larger indoor religious services, rites and ceremony gatherings, indoor meeting and event space, indoor seated events, casino and bingo halls. Other outdoor activities from Step 2 are also permitted to operate indoors. So we're really excited that we're going to be moving into this next, or we've moved into this next phase actually a few days early. Now, as I mentioned, we will be staying in this phase for at least 21 days or until at least 80% of the 12 and older population in Ontario has received at least 1 dose of the vaccine and 75% have received their second. And of course, they want with no public health units to have any less than 70% of their eligible population fully vaccinated. So really the goal is getting to at least 70% of the eligible population 12 and older to be fully vaccinated by the time we go into, reopening permanently. That's the goal, right? We want to stay open. We don't want to go back into lockdown restrictions. If we do continue with the trend that we've been having in terms of this new reopening roadmap, we may be going into that next phase a few days early, as we've been doing in the past. So some exciting news there. These updates keep us excited, keep us motivated. We're so happy to be here and able to appreciate the weather and being able to appreciate these looser restrictions. It's a yay. We've been waiting for this for a while, haven't we? Now, today on the Chat Up Show, we're all about representation, especially here on the GBCAM network. And recently, there's been a win for representation in terms of the Academy, or the Oscars as we know it. There have been more Black members on the voting board of the Academy in recent history, and that's something that a lot of people have been calling for so long. More representation behind the scenes of the Academy so that we can see more diversity when it comes to those nominated for their craft. We often think that, diversity in film is only what we see on screen, but it's also important what happens off screen and behind the scenes. When we think of the seats at the table, we think of those who are making decisions about what we're gonna indulge in this entertainment industry of ours that fuels so much of our culture and so much of how we interact with society and how we view society as well. And it's important to have that diversity represented, of course, on screen, but behind the scenes as well. And so when we have people who are of different diverse backgrounds who can vote for, who will receive Oscar nominations, we'll hopefully see, folks who deserve the accolades receiving the accolades. When we hear of writer rooms being diverse as well, it brings it to life on camera in a different way when we know that those who are making decisions are thinking of all the different perspectives, and we're seeing so many different people represented. As I said, it's all about the seats at the table for those major decision makers, from directors, producers, writers' rooms, all of that. Even in our festivals and festival circuits, having that representation really does make an impact. So today we have a special guest joining us who knows a little bit something about representation on and off the screen. Please help us and welcome Frances Ann Solomon, who is the founding member of the Windrush Caribbean Film Festival, which the film festival is now in the second annual running. The goal of the festival is actually to help educate audiences in the contribution of the Windrush generation and their impact through discussions and screenings in cinemas. But that's not all you do, is it, Frances Ann? You also hello, welcome. You are also founder of the Caribbean Tales Media Group as well, which also brings more representation for us in the diaspora. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about you and how you were inspired by film initially to go into this industry?
Of my journey, I'll say that growing up in the Caribbean, growing up in Trinidad as a child, we never learned about our own stories. We never, even though, when I was growing up, Trinidad was independent. So our leaders were Black, our teachers were Black, the professionals and all the people who we saw around us. These were people who looked like us. But still, apparently, for bringing about the emancipation of slavery in 1812 with no help from Black people, right? They were just victims. So, growing up, it quickly became apparent to any of us that we needed to create and tell our own stories, which I can remember incredibly rich culture, as do you, I'm sure. And so it's important for our children. It's important for us, for our pride, for our dignity, for for passing on who we are from generation to generation. One of our big heroes, for example, is Miss Lou from Jamaica. And, I made a show about her a long time ago. And she used to say, I think it's important to know, from whence you came, It's important to know who you are.
And it's interesting bringing up growing up in Trinidad and not really being taught the history of the land from the perspective of the natives, right? And to then also learn about the history of other people's, empires, and that being the forefront. You say one day was only focused on like
One day.
one day of the slavery. And even growing up as well, for me in history class, it was like that 1 week maybe we got of learning about
Wow.
centuries of history, really is what it is.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it speaks a lot to why people call for so much representation. And for you personally, when you're working in the industry, how how much does it mean to you when you come across someone else who's also, doing it for the culture, so to speak?
Yeah, it means it's everything, it's a particular kind of journey that you set yourself on. You become the griots of our time. If you're working in the media as a Black practitioner, as a Black business owner, if you like, to champion that I'm going to put out is going to be the content of my culture. It's going to be our stories, and those stories are not necessarily welcome in the commercial marketplace because things have changed just in the last 9 months. It's ridiculous that it takes them, we have to say 9 months ago, George Floyd was murdered. And since then, there's been a reckoning. There's lots more opportunities. But dynamic change happens overnight. So we're still to see what that is actually going to result in.
Yeah. But a lot of people say that this change has been called for so long. A long time coming. I mean, George Floyd's murder was the tipping point, I think, for a lot of people, but it wasn't the beginning of,
No.
more. Yeah.
A lot of us have tired, you get annoyed, but I feel in a way that to understand what racism is in Canada, like just how insidious it is, you have to really understand what has been done to the Indigenous people in this country. I mean, right, it's just such a horrendous situation that we as a country find ourselves in this moment, where finally the truth is coming out for all to see about the genocide that has been committed against Indigenous peoples. And I believe
An example, I think a lot of the time Canadian racism is compared to American racism, and though they are maybe a different breed, they're from the same tree.
exactly.
And as you mentioned, the history here is so insidious to the point now that this is all coming out, and it still feels as though we're just moving on, as if this news hasn't shocked and rocked a lot of people, as if it's not lives that were lost. And it's all part of that erasure. As you mentioned, the denial of it happening is part of how you erase certain people from history, and them not having that power to, speak up on such public platforms for themselves in their own. It can get frustrating, especially when you're seeing and dealing with that and advocating for people's voices to be heard and respected. How do you personally handle that pressure? Because it feels almost like, it can feel like a burden sometimes, right?
Oh, gosh, I feel like you have to be very centered in your own truth. For me, what motivates and inspires me are the voices, honestly, of my ancestors who are literally sitting on my shoulders telling me all the time, come on, girl, get up. Get up, keep going. What you resting for? Who are you feeling sorry for? Girl, get up. Get up yourself and just keep going, because we didn't put you here
Yeah.
for you to start to cry now. you know, um, there's a line in Maya Angelou's poem, I am the dream and the thing of the slave. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we are literally what our ancestors
Yeah.
could could only dream of. And so we can't complain. We just have to keep going, keep fighting for the children who are coming after so that they have the opportunities
Yeah.
that we are probably going to die without having, really.
That always sounds so bleak because it's that thing of a lot of people are like, oh, why are you fighting? Because, like our generation struggled, so let the next generation toughen up and deal with it. Like we had it much worse. But then there are others who are on the other side, like, no, we shouldn't continue this cycle of just taking the bare minimum. Like we should be able to stand up and say, hey, this is what
Yeah.
we demand and expect. And that's what
Yeah.
we're going to go for.
Our children and
There we go. As long as we're doing it and we know that, it's moving on the journey. So what is it about filmmaking specifically that keeps you inspired and keeps you going?
Well, I think every filmmaker is a film buff, like you is a storytelling medium of our generation, right? I mean, I don't know how you can not love films. I'm lucky in that, I learned how to make them.
Yeah.
And I feel that we have a responsibility as storytellers, as film storytellers, to represent. I mean, the power of film is huge. The power of media is huge. The message that is put out speaks to such a wide audience now. Your audience is always global. And so what stories are you really telling? And so it comes down to I'm telling the stories that these people who are sitting on my shoulders tell me I have to tell. And they're not made people.
Yeah.
I cannot betray them. I cannot deny them. And nobody else can't tell me what to do. This is, I think, a huge strength of those of us who grew up in the Caribbean or grew up in Africa, that, you have all kinds of people telling you, white racists, saying, looking at you strange, and going, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. You're crazy, you're stupid, shut your mouth, you don't know. And then you have your mother and your auntie and your uncle and your grandfather and your great-grandfather and your great-grandfather's friends and all them people who you grew up with, who are just like, what? Excuse me? I'm sure you have the same experience, right?
Yeah.
You think that your mother is going to sit there and take any nonsense from white people? Do you know what I'm saying, though?
No, ma'am.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, and she raised the daughter the same way.
This is real thing. This is very real. So that's where you get your strength from, and that's how you keep going. And those are the stories that I want everybody to know. I want everybody to know just how amazing those people were who raised me.
That's beautiful. I think that there's certain, across the Africa and the Caribbean, I think, there's obviously like the connections that we can feel. And that is one of the one things that we know, like there's the compatibility or the similarity rather, that we have such rich culture and such rich history that for so long hasn't been told. And now we're seeing us kind of reclaiming our own stories. And because oral history is such a big part of Caribbean.
And we haven't had the resources to make films, but we have to, because that's how you communicate now.
Yeah.
So that's the work really. But yeah, the stories are amazing. Stories are amazing. The characters are amazing. The trajectory. I mean, even if you think about we have stories about where we came from. And like Caribbean people come from so many different places, right? Like all over Africa. We have no idea
Yeah.
how many different places in Africa we come from. Places in India. There are Lebanese people, there are Chinese people, there are Europeans, and then there are indigenous people in the Caribbean. And that's just the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
And then the journeys, like people from the Caribbean as well as from Africa, I believe. We travel a lot, to the Caribbean. We came from Africa, they put us there. And then there's huge populations of Caribbean and African people in North America, every major urban center, every they talk about, the history of England is this, that, and the, or whatever kind of. Those histories mean nothing unless it includes our stories.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Canadian. I'm actually, and they say, oh, they don't say it so much again, but back in the day, I would apply for funding and say, we fund Canadian stories. But I'm Canadian.
Yeah. Like, that's like, it's because it's one of those things where it's like, what they mean, but they can't say it actively because then it's against rights and it's, it's not politically correct. Yeah.
They say it. That's what's sickening.
Yeah.
I've literally been in situations where I've been told, we don't do that. We don't do diversity.
Wow.
But they can't, like you said, next time they say that, you just put them straight up in social media.
Blow up their spot.
blow them up. Can't.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, these are good times for us. Hope.
Yeah. But we're also seeing a lot more people creating their own platforms and own spaces for representation. I mean, you with Caribbean Tales Media Group as well. And you have a unique experience having also worked in the UK and worked here. How would you say like the industry when it comes to its approach to diversity and inclusivity maybe differs in Britain compared to North America, let's say?
It's the same thing, it's just horrendous, awful.
Yeah.
It's very, very bad. But I feel like whether it's England, Europe, North America, the US or Canada, you say, well, this one expresses it slightly differently. Like I thought when I left England that I was coming to Canada because multiculturalism and all this. And then I came here and I found apartheid. I'm not even joking, no access. I was like, I didn't expect this. I didn't expect, but it's just a different iteration of the same set of blocks, right?
Yeah.
But I think what has changed a lot, and I'm sure you guys will agree, is digital media.
Then it also brings up the other point. It's like, why are we even trying to compete? Why not just stay in our lane and just continue creating our own things? Like, why do we look towards these award shows for the validation or these festival circuits for these opportunities? Why not create them as we've been doing and continue to do for ourselves and support ourselves as well? That's the other
I mean, it's a big debate. They not a debate I feel like what it's not it's not that we have to get validation from them. It's that they have to recognize us. Because if, yes, for example, can
Okay. So we're just having some technical difficulties there, but we will take a quick break on that note. And once we're back, we're going to continue our chat up with Frances Ann Solomon. So stay tuned. Do you want to be your own boss and make income or extra income with flexible schedule? Welcome to Keenan Courier. Keenan Courier works as a marketplace platform connecting customers who need something delivered with drivers that are willing to serve them. Courier with any vehicle, better trip allocation, and cash out your earnings whenever you want. Download our driver apps today to sign up. Do you want to be your own boss and make income or extra income with Hello and welcome back to the Chat Up Show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aloidi, and today we're discussing why representation is so important in the film industry. And we're joined by special guest, Frances Ann. We're talking about, the need for recognition, let's say, not so much validation from these existing corporations and entities in award shows. It's more about recognizing the talent that's out there. You want to continue on that point?
Well, I agree that it's like, for example, in the film industry, to get to be that you have to kind of fit their model of what is a black film or an ethnic film in order to find favor. And unless you find favor with them, it really is a big hindrance. And that goes for the distribution circuit as well. Distribution companies are almost 100% run by white people, who don't understand our stories, don't understand our audiences, don't know how to access our audiences. And it goes on, reviewers of content. A lot of them are white. They would have come up through the white institutions, the New York Times, and so on and so on and so on. And so again, they don't understand our worlds. They have no points of reference. How could they? They might have gone to, Cambridge or Oxford and had a very limited, narrow experience of life. And so they don't know our realities. They don't understand. And so how do you know? And I agree that the goal is not to fit in to their idea of what we should be, because you can't win that game. You just can't. But we do have to demand in this time that they recognize that there's a problem, and that they give us space. So, for example, one of the battles that we have had recently is that we want festivals like Caribbean Tales and other Black festivals to be recognized on a par you be there and be poor. So, like we don't get the same kind of funding as white festivals. Filmmakers don't get supported to attend our festivals in the same way that they get supported to attend white festivals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on and on and on and on, right? All these ways in which we end up being poor. Like literally, we can't sustain ourselves because we don't have the money to do it. And so it's not about trying to be like them. It's about them acknowledging the importance and value of what we do and supporting it financially.
Yeah. And I think that's like where it boils down to. Like, it's a lot deeper than a lot of us realize when we're thinking of what representation is. You mentioned even with reviewers, reviewing Black films, and also thinking of the type of Black films that we've seen that make it to these large festivals. A lot of the time the stories are rather similar. I mean, maybe in recent years we're starting to see a shift of the genre of stories that make it far with, Jordan Peele coming out with his... It's a lot deeper, and then also even coming to funding as well. Like, the representation isn't just for what we see as the finished product on the screen, it's the steps to get there as well.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Yeah. It's that's why they call it systemic, right?
Yeah.
That it's all these interlinked. It's coming at you every which way. It's not just one thing. Okay, guys, stop being racist now, because it's never a personal thing. It's the way that the whole system is set up to support specific values and to ensure that certain kinds of interests have power that they need, and the rest of us serve that power. That was how slavery was built. That's how colonization worked, on the basis of we want power, we're going to subjugate others to within our system. So it's a very difficult thing to unpick.
Yeah. Unless you're like immersed in it and you can't.
Unless you're immersed in it and you realize like it's a trap you can't get out of, it's a web, and you end up kind of, talking to your ancestors all the time. Then people say you're crazy.
What did you say there? Okay, keep going.
What do you want me to do now?
What next?
Come on.
Okay. Oh, no, I don't want to do that.
No, I don't want to do it again, please.
Yeah. But I mean, there's also like another level of frustration when you do speak out and say, this is what we're demanding because it's systemic, and then you're met with, race isn't everything. It's not always about race, but you yourself know that it is. Yeah. And it's almost like that constant gaslighting that a lot of people get, especially when it comes to the entertainment industry, where people are like, but wouldn't you rather the best of the best be represented? Shouldn't we be giving the opportunity to the best people? And it's like, okay, but we're only seeing the same type of best people. Like, something's missing here.
Exactly. Like, you have to answer these questions constantly. Don't you think that by kind of, open to more kinds of people? So there's a very limited way of thinking about things. And you can't, and then you think, okay, you've won that battle, you turn around, boom, another one is standing right there. It's quite something. But it is, I can't say it's not changing slowly. So hopefully, like I said, our children will benefit and things will change. I don't know. I really don't know. Because if you look at the big picture, right? You look at the big picture of what's happening in the world. The rise of white nationalism is a thing right now in America, here in Canada, in Europe. I mean, these white nationalist parties are on the rise, right? Suppose Trump gets back into power, what is going to happen? Do you know what I mean? I mean, this is a very real thing. And so when we say there's progress, it could easily just slip back, and all of us could end up in gas chambers. I believe that very firmly, and that, you know,
It's hard because it's true, you start to see,
we
this
have.
rise coming up in recent years across the globe. And we worry, like, have we progressed enough for enough people to recognize it and stand up for what is right, as opposed to, 40, 50 years ago when majority would not stand up against racism in general. But yeah, it's there's hope, but then it's also a worry that, it's not happening quickly enough.
But that we could go back.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, I was around 25 years ago, and we were involved in the same kinds of struggles. And then, we went back, and now we're here again. Oh, by the way, racism.
Remember that?
Yeah, it's very concerning.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, just to touch a little bit on the Windrush Caribbean Festival,
Yeah.
and just the name as well. I think it has so much power to it because you know what it's representing. But could you talk a little bit more about why it was so important to have this as a platform?
Identity
Yeah.
was brought to of what was going on at that time. 1957, Ghana became independent. Um, you know, across the African continent, a lot of the countries were claiming independence, were throwing off the yoke of British colonialism. In the early 60s, the Caribbean did the same thing. So it was an absolutely transformative moment. A lot of those leaders were educated in England, fostered their their independence dreams and plans while in England, met with each other, plotted. There was a concept in the late 50s of the United States of Africa. I don't know if you know of this or have heard of this, but the leaders of the independent African countries would meet in different Africa to help to build Africa. And we also had a Caribbean Federation dream, and these things failed because, to a large extent, the European powers and the colonial powers had no intention of, letting that happen, and
Like
they
full
undermined all
independence.
those. They killed our leaders, they killed Lumumba, they undermined our revolutions, they destroyed all our hopes for independence because they didn't want to give up the wealth that they had been acquiring from those territories. And I think it's a really important thing to understand that that moment gave birth to civil rights in the United States. It gave birth to, I was born into that time. All of us who grew up in independent countries in Africa and the Caribbean or throughout, we are products. Like in South Africa, they say people born after the end of apartheid And so we started the Windrush Caribbean Film
Yeah.
Festival.
Even just hearing you speak about it, there's so many like little tidbits of history that I don't fully understand or have a grasp of. Just hearing of the hopes and dreams of, Caribbean leaders and African leaders wanting that unity that a lot of us are even craving for till this day. Like we want to see that come to fruition, but knowing that there's certain powers that be that have kind of hindered that. And these are stories, as you say, that, have built at least the diasporic culture of those who are from like African or Caribbean nations and states, but also built, our identity as well. And to think that these stories could also add to that, but they've kind of been kept away or twisted in the history books to paint certain people in a better light than others.
Exactly.
Don't want to name names, creating, hero complexes for certain European nations, like they are the saving grace for all of us. Actuality, when we actually look at the history, it was almost like they were holding us back from getting to that potential. But having film festivals like this, where these stories are the forefront of, and the purpose is to educate people, to say that, hey, this is what life was like, this is the impact that it has today, and it's important that we know this story. Now, the theme for this year is
Carnival, yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about this theme and what that means?
Brought with them the steel band, the costumes, and they began to hold carnivals. So there's a huge tradition in England. The Notting Hill Carnival is obviously you know one of the biggest. I think it's called the biggest event and festival event in Europe. Um, and we have our parallels here. The Toronto Carnival and New York Carnival and so on. But, just to celebrate all the different art forms that came off Carnival. So the different kinds of music that was brought to and who brought the steel pan. There's a lot of different designers, high art.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Just even just what sticks, over generations, and that people get excited for this every year. Like Notting Hill Carnival, I know I have friends who are planning months in advance for that, and that's like passed down from generation to generation. Folks who have been living there, part of the Windrush generation, who kept that part of the culture alive and well. And even when you go to England, you can really see a lot of like the Caribbean influence within the culture, not just in the Black population, just at large. Like there's a strong root in that country, but for some reason, it's not being recognized to the full potential. And if it is, it's when we're talking about Home Secretary Priti Patel's deportation flights, and we're hearing about that news. And like these are people who've helped build the country to where it is now, and now you're telling them in their older age, like, you got to go back to where they came from, but they've built roots here. It gets frustrating, and especially, how do you feel about that?
I think it's terrifying. I mean, I think when I lived in England, it was always like a story we would tell that they would come and tell us that we had to go back where, that this was one of the first things that you got when you went to England, in the 50s or at any time in Europe, anytime. Why don't you go back where you came from? Go back where you came from. There was always this kind of threat that you might be deported, but I never thought that in 2020, do you know what I mean? It's like some futuristic nightmare
Yeah.
that in 2020, the government is going to pack up all the people who came here legitimately, as British citizens and send them back to countries they don't know to die.
Yeah.
Some people passed away. It's terrible. It's terrible. But I mean, that understand the reality of just what's going on, what the possibilities are, that it's really happening, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Even just hearing you say it, like I know that it's a reality for a lot of us that we have to be on guard, even just dealing with racism in general. Like we always have some sort of a defense up ready to like defend ourselves, protect ourselves. But that just having that, it's a lot to carry around. And sometimes it's hard to see through and see the bigger picture, as you mentioned, that you want future generations not to have to deal with that. But when, as you say, you take one step forward and then it feels like we're taking like 5 steps back now. In 2020, so many people were murdered in such a short amount of time. And we saw that because of the digital age in real time. And we're viewing these things happening in the modern age that we feel, could only have happened back when there wasn't this much technology, there wasn't this much opportunity to hold the guilty parties accountable. Being a lot of the time, people,
Being held to account,
yeah,
absolutely. It's very scary.
yeah,
It's very weird. It's very odd. It doesn't feel, but it is. It's real. So yeah.
yeah. But
So
even,
we do our bit by telling stories and
yeah,
telling. I think it's important. I think because the whole racist narrative is a narrative. It's a story. I mean, this is the why it's important to understand what storytelling is. Storytelling is actually defining reality.
yeah,
This is my reality, and so articulating that over and over and over and over again is critically important. For us, for the survival of all of us.
yeah,
Because it's because a certain narrative was and was not being told that people were, sold into slavery, were marched into gas chambers, all of those are stories.
yeah. Even speaking of the stories that we do tell, there's obviously like the dark history that we can't shy away from. We have to tell it because it's even darker and deeper than a lot of us know. We only know the surface, and already that is too much for me personally to stomach a lot of the time. But there's a lot of really dark stuff that went on with the main powers that be, the main countries that were holding a lot of the power during those times and even today. But then there's also the other happier side, where Black joy in general to be represented instead of only hearing these sad, somewhat depressing stories, that there's also the light on the other side of that. What do you feel about that sentiment that we shouldn't only focus on showing, the dark history, that maybe we should start focusing more on showing the lighter side, the happier, that we have overcome and we're still a resilient people.
stories. We have to. It's therapy for us. But we can do it with joy. You can actually tell. There's joy in telling stories well.
Puppy in the background's agreeing with you. Your puppy in the background's agreeing with you that there's joy out there.
But it's not separable from the pain, you know? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's our gift to be able to do both at the same time.
Yeah. And as long as we are the ones, you know, in charge of telling those stories in that narrative, as opposed to other people telling those stories for us and it being misconstrued or not represented well or correctly, I think is what is kind of become the conversation in recent times. It's like, yes, okay, we've called for more representation. We want to see these stories being told, but who is telling the story is also important.
They make us into victims or martyrs or criminals, or reality is much more complicated. Or they want, you know, they make it a tragedy. Reality is much more nuanced than this, you know, and when you're telling stories authentically, you realize that there's always, the sun always shines. It always rises. There's always something beautiful that's happening in life alongside the pain, always. And that's the challenge that's what we get to do when we tell our own stories.
That's beautiful. So for the festival now, it's on virtually. How can folks, you know, purchase tickets and make sure that they're able to enjoy what the festival has to offer?
So the Windrush Caribbean Film Festival
So much, Francis Ann, for joining us today on the Chat Up Show. It's been such a pleasure chatting it up with you, and we'll definitely have to have you on sometime soon again.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And with that, we are concluding the Chat Up Show. As always, you know, you can keep up with the Chat Up Show 24/7 at the GBKM network, 24/7 at www.gbkm.tv or www.gbkm.fm, where you can like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Make sure to download our free app available for iOS and Android devices, so you will be notified every time we go live, so you'll never have to miss a show again. Make sure you continue to follow us on Facebook and YouTube at GBKM Network, and Instagram and Twitter also at GBKM Network, to catch up with any updates going on right here on the network. You can follow me, your host, Elizabeth Aloidi, on Twitter and Instagram. It's TIS_Liz_O, where you can get some chat up updates as well. And with that, I will chat with you the same time, same place next week. Take care.
The bad news is that everyone is a potential victim, but the good news is that everyone is a potential solution. Sensitize the masses to sanitize, keep a social distance and quarantine. Stop!
The coronavirus is sweeping over mankind.
Everybody must be alert. It's a global pandemic we can never take for granted.
Omulwadde wa corona temubuzanyisa bange.
Namutu must be alert. It's a matter of life we can never take for granted. Discipline and personal hygiene, and make sure you regularly wash your hands. Keep a distance from everyone. Report anything like a symptom. Serious fever is a symptom. Dry cough is a symptom. Walkway tamula is a symptom. Itchy eyes and flu is a symptom.
Abo bobulwadde bwekuuma obutabusiiga, lwejjemu batannalwala, olaga omwoyo gwe gwanga. Labira ku itale
Everybody must be alive.